I added a giant zombie to my game. Oh, and I finished up my giant spiders AI. My name is Lee, and I'm working on a project called Another Zombie Game. Instead of actually finishing my spiders AI, I ended up rewriting all of it. I thought I was clever enough to write my own AI, but thankfully I quickly realized that I'm not. So I scrapped my original scripts and implemented a state machine. Jason Weimann has a great video on how to implement a state machine in Unity. But basically it's just implementing the code version of Unity's animation state machine. So I planned out the spider state machine with 6 different states. The spider spawning, looking at the player, attacking the player, retreating away from the player, and then the passive attack. I started with implementing the look at player state, where the spider simply rotates in the direction of the player. For now I have this as the entry point of the state machine, and later I'll change this to the spawn state. Once the player is in attack range, we transition to the spit attack state, where I used the logic from the attack in my last devlog. Then I worked on the retreat state. This ended up being a little bit more difficult than I had expected. So I used a list of spawn points, and then I calculated the furthest point away from the player and used that as the spider's retreat point. I added a nav mesh agent to the spider and baked the navigation for the agent, and well, now if the spider loses 25% health, then it retreats. Once the spider reaches the retreat point, which took a bit of searching to figure out what properties exactly I needed to check to determine if the spider reached said point. If the player is still within attack range when the spider reaches the target position, then we just retreat again. Now if the player is not in range when the spider reaches its destination, then we transition into the next state. For this attack I wanted the spider to lay an egg, which would spawn smaller spiders. That's right, more spiders. I started with the spider's animation for laying the egg sac. It looks kind of weird while animating, but the procedural animation should make it look good. But there was a problem. When we transitioned to the passive attack state and began the animation, the spider teleported across the map to its original position. This was because I animated the parent game object, whose position I'm actually transforming. So when the animation is played, the game object's position when I animated was at origin. Not only does this mean I have to recreate the animation, but I have to animate every child object that makes up the spider's body and legs. So I animated the body, and then the legs, and I also animated the butt, because why not? I moved on to modeling the egg sac that the spider would spawn after it retreats. I threw that into Unity, and animated the egg sac so that it looks more organic. I also added a spawn animation, and I added an animation when the egg sac takes damage. I gave the egg, and I'm going to stop saying egg sac, health, so it can be destroyed before any spiders spawn from it. And then I added some particle effects to make it look more gross. Now I need some smaller spiders, which I thought would be easy enough. I should be able to make the bigger ones smaller, adjust some scripts maybe, and be done with it. Right?
It was at this moment that he knew.
I started off with taking the giant spider and just scaling it down, but right away you can see that its legs went kind of wonky and it does a weird dance when we try to procedurally animate. I'm going to skip all the boring stuff, but basically I had to scale all of the procedural animation and inverse kinematic script values down as well. And then I had to adjust some colliders, ignore some other colliders, and I ended up with something that looked a lot better. Now the spider needs to attack the player. And staying in theme with poison gas, I simply had the spider chase the player quickly and then explode when it got in range of the player, producing a poison gas cloud. And then it was time to make the spider spawn from the egg, so I added a timer. Once the timer is up, the egg explodes. And then I added a minimum and maximum number for the spiders to spawn. For now, I used 1 to 5, and then I had them spawn at a random point within a circle radius around the egg. And I was happy with the result, but I feel like I created something kind of disturbing. So I threw all that into a prefab and made the spider spawn the egg at the end of its passive attack animation. And I had something that looked like this. Oh, and then I decided to throw a grenade at the giant spider, and I discovered this, and this one. So of course I moved on to create the next boss. My second boss is a giant zombie, so it should be a lot easier to implement. I started on the model, and I was inspired by one of my favorite Super Nintendo games, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, and I'm pretty happy with the way the model turned out. So I went to Mixamo and rigged up the model. I threw it in Unity and reused the animations from my other zombies, but yeah, because I scaled up the model, I had to download the animations again rigged with this specific model and then match those animations with the model scale. That's better. First, I got the nav agent working on the zombie, and then I started on this state machine. The state machine for this boss was going to be very basic with 4 different states: the spawning state, moving to the player, attacking the player, and then death. I already implemented moving to the player, so I just had to plug the logic into the state machine. Then I moved on to the attack. I wanted the zombie to stomp at the player and have dirt projectiles shot towards the player. So I used the same algorithm for the spider spit attack, but I used 3 projectiles and adjusted how they target the player. And if the player isn't moving, then I just shoot at the player's current position. Once I had the prototype working, I created particle effects for the stomp and then added a shockwave kind of particle effect for a bit more detail. I also wanted to add some force when the dirt hits something other than the player. So I check for a rigid body when a collider is hit and apply an explosive force. So I was really happy with that. So I moved on to implementing the death state. Just like the other zombies, I simply wanted the giant zombie to ragdoll when it dies. So I added colliders with joint components, threw on my health and ragdoll script, and well, while I think this is hilarious, I had to spend a long time trying to tweak the joints because for some reason the joints are backwards. And then I got something like this. Not perfect, but it works for now. Finally, I wanted to add a health bar to the giant zombie, like the spiders, but it's not easily visible. So I made it part of the UI instead of being a part of the world space. I will eventually make a final decision on which direction I want to go, a health bar on the UI or a health bar in world space. But it seems like the easiest solution is a health bar on the UI side. So please let me know what you think in the comments. With the health bar finished, it was time to start working on something I had been procrastinating for a while: spawn animations. I started with the giant zombie because I thought the giant spider would be a lot more difficult to animate. So I found a climbing animation that I liked on Mixamo with the idea of the zombie climbing up from under the ground when it spawns. Once I got the animation set up, I quickly ran into a problem. I had to fix this by starting the zombie's position below the ground, and then when the animation ends, moving the zombie's Y position back to origin at 0. And I added some dirt particle effects to make it look like the zombie's actually climbing up out of the ground. Finally, I moved on to the dreaded spider spawn animation. I really didn't want to work on this because I was worried I would have to rewrite a lot of stuff. But it actually ended up being a lot easier than the giant zombie animation. I created a new spawn animation and animation state. I started the spider below the ground and then I moved it above the ground in sort of a jumping motion. And then I let the procedural animation handle the rest. I was pretty happy with the initial outcome, so I added some particle effects like I did the giant zombie, but I wanted it to look like dirt was falling off the spider. Now that I have a few enemies and bosses to spawn, I wanted to work on one of the main systems of the game. So I have 2 scripts, the round system and the spawner. The round system script handles the current round when a new round starts and tells the spawner when to start spawning enemies. The spawner script handles spawning specific enemy types based on the current round. It will decide what should spawn, a normal zombie or a boss. It will eventually handle spawning interactable objects like the perk machine, but for now, every 10 rounds a boss is spawned and I decide what boss is spawned by pseudo-random chance. Finally, I worked on the UI for the current round and new round transitions, and I created what I think is a nice animation for the start of each round. Progress has been pretty slow for the last month since I've been pretty busy with life, so I've been prototyping and planning out what I want to work on next and what I need to refactor. I also need to sit down and figure out a better workflow so I can be a lot more productive in the coming months, and hopefully I'll start uploading more regularly, but I wouldn't put any money on that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and I'll see you next time, whenever that might be.